Hello and welcome to AM Language. We are now live for the upper intermediate / advanced lesson, where we'll be looking at Unit 2 this week. But I'm just going to try and combine a little bit of what you'll be looking at in the upper intermediate unit this week, along with some extra additional things to do with advanced. So drawing from a couple of things here, I think with the advanced, what I might look to see is if we can develop any potential vocabulary that would be of use. So as well as developing conversation, actually, I think there's a few things we could look at. So actually, yes, I think we can look at a couple of things. I'm just going to share this, the lesson online, so everyone knows that the lesson is now taking place. We've already got 6. Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me know who you are. Let me know if you have any questions. And feel free to join in and participate in the lesson. If you have questions, go for it. Ask them. If you think you know the answer to something before I've said what the answer is, please jump in, see if you can get the answer before I can. And where is it? There we go. Shared. Okay, the lesson is now shared. Hopefully more people will be joining us. So in this unit, Unit 2, what we have here is, now the general topic is called sightseeing. Having said that, you get to learn how to describe buildings and areas in more detail, agree using synonyms, show people around your town or city, talk about festivals and carnivals, and talk about future events in a variety of ways. What we're going to do is we're going to try and highlight the things that I think are perhaps the most important for you to look at. So, for instance, today we'll have a look at introducing some new vocabulary. We'll look a little bit at developing conversations. If there's time, we'll have a little look at grammar in terms of relative clauses. And from the advanced side of things, which you guys in the upper intermediate should still be able to do, what we're going to look at is just looking at some vocabulary, phrasal verbs that we can use when trying to understand something. In particular, we're going to be looking at okay, yes. We're going to be using phrasal verbs such as get on well, come up with, in the context of our relationship with either people or, for that matter, with places as well. So we've got a few things here that we can look at. I think some of the extra language in the advanced paper we might end up looking at in the future, maybe on the when is it, Friday's lesson. I'll combine it with more up intermediate stuff. There's a lot of rich vocabulary here that would be a nice blend between advanced and upper intermediate. Elena. Good afternoon, Elena. Thank you very much for sending me a good afternoon as well. Good afternoon to you as well. So let's begin. So if you look at page 16 in your upper intermediate book, you will find vocabulary, buildings, and areas. We'll go through this and we'll just have a little look at what we mean by these, by some of the words in bold. So, for example, number 1, what kind of buildings and other things might you see in an affluent area? Okay, first of all, you've got this affluent area. Simply put, an affluent area is a busy area. There are businesses, there are shops. There's usually a lot of people around. If I were to describe an affluent area in Malta, you'd be looking at places like St. Julian's or Sliema. If you are in the United States, you'd be looking at areas within the New York area, LA area, San Diego, San Francisco. So somewhere where there's a lot happening. What kind of buildings are usually described as grand? Grand is something big and probably old in some sort of way, maybe with a historical connection to it. So, prime example, a grand building would be Buckingham Palace, for example, in London, or the Colosseum, just to name one of the many buildings you can mention in Rome. Number three, what might you want to do to a hideous building or monument? Well, hideous simply means ugly. A hideous building is an ugly building. And if I'm going to be totally honest, there are a few buildings in new buildings in Malta that I would describe as hideous, personally. But you also have some fantastic buildings. The older buildings tend to be more beautiful than the modern day ones, I think. Prime example, actually, of something hideous. To be honest, just go to some places in North England, where I'm from, Huddersfield. The old buildings look quite nice. Some of the new modern day stuff, fairly hideous. In fact, in some places, it's just awful. Next one. Can you think of a place with a lot of high-rise buildings? High-rise simply means skyscrapers. So we cannot say anywhere in Malta is high-rise. One skyscraper does not mean it's a high-rise area. New York, Dubai, well, most places in the major cities in the United States, Hong Kong, Sydney, all of those areas are prime examples of high-rise buildings. Then we've got something, number 5, what might the government do to a historic area? Well, you've got some options of what they might do. If it's a historic area, it might be declared as a heritage site, such as Valletta. Valletta is now considered to be a World Heritage Site, therefore it is protected. It's very difficult to knock down buildings, and it's very difficult to build new buildings as well. So it's kind of protected. Number 6, what do you call the opposite of a deprived area? Can anyone guess what the opposite to a deprived area might be? Any ideas what the opposite to deprived might be? I'll give you a few more seconds. It's actually, you can find it in number 1. The answer is affluent. So you've got deprived, and then the opposite to deprived is affluent. Number 7. Oh, rich. Yeah, you could use rich as well. It's a rich area. It's a wealthy area. It's an affluent area. It's a well-invested area. Yes, you've got a few options. Yes, Elena, you could go with rich if you want. Number 7, what do you find in a residential area? Quite simply, houses and flats and accommodation. Hopefully some nice buildings, but if you are in a place that was built in the 70s, probably a lot of ugly buildings. Actually, to be honest with you, again, it makes me think of some parts of North England. There are some parts of North England which are really, really dull. Like the residential areas are just ugly. I mean, you know what? It's the sort of place, England, there's a lot of rain in England. It's a lot of cloud. It's miserable. And you then got ugly buildings. And then you go and live in the ugly building. I mean, that is, you can see why people in England want to constantly go on holiday. Anyway, that's the north of England, slightly different. Um, I'm from the north of England, so that's why I can joke about the north of England. Next of all, 8. Would you recommend a tourist to visit a rough area? Well, from my own personal experience, I would never recommend anyone to go to a rough area. I remember when I was in Quito and I was in Ecuador, and I remember being told where the rough areas were because I wanted to know where the bad areas were. And that's simply what we mean by rough. Dangerous, probably where there's some crime. And in Quito, there are a few places that are probably quite rough. So it's all, I personally wouldn't recommend going to rough areas. Next one, what might a local government do to a run down building or area? Run down, simply put, it's old, it's ugly, it's falling down anyway. It's better just to knock it down and start again because you can't save it. It really is that bad of a building. I think that's a lot of buildings in Malta, to be honest with you. They're always building. What do you call the opposite of a stunning building? Simply put, if on one hand you have a stunning building, on the other hand, you could have a hideous building. So stunning, fantastic. Hideous, awful, ugly. Nobody likes it. 11. What might you find in a trendy area and what kind of people might live there? Trendy is another word for fashionable. It's popular. Like in the UK, I would say Brighton is a trendy area. Uh, uh, Bristol is a trendy area. Manchester is a lively and trendy area. A lot of really good good places to go, be it socializing or job opportunities. Yeah, that's a trendy area. What finally, number 12, what's usually happening in an up and coming area? Up and coming area is a place that is being developed. It's what you'd have described as let's see. Okay, the current capital of Kazakhstan. The name I can't remember, but if you go back to 1999, the capital of Kazakhstan was still what is now the capital of Kazakhstan. I think I've got the right city. Was just a few houses in the middle of nowhere, and they decided this is going to be a new city, so they started to build it. And then, therefore, by 2003, 2004, it was an up and coming area. New businesses, new buildings, a lot of investment. And that's an up and coming area, a place that is seeing a lot of money and new businesses being invested in it. So let's move on to number 3. Number 3 over here, we need to complete on page 16. We need to complete the sentences with the correct form of these verbs. So, for example, we've got, I hate that building. It's hideous, if you ask me. It should be. And then you've got words in the box. Base, dominate, knock down, saw, date back, house, renovate, and steer clear. What we need to do is we need to read the sentence in the context and then choose the verb in the box and put it into its correct form. So if we look at number 1, we have, I hate that building. It's hideous. If you ask me, it should be knocked down. It should be knocked down. So here it's going to be knocked down. It should be knocked down. Why might you ask? Well, this is a conditional, but we're adding an element of the passive voice in it. It should be knocked down. We're not saying who should knock it down. We're just saying it should be knocked down. So that's why we're going to play around with the verbs a little bit. Therefore, we have to think. So number one is knocked down. Obviously, you're going to add ed on to knock. So I'll write that in. So question three, number one, knocked down. Okay, so I'm going to give you, guys, I'm going to give you, let's see, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of time. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Okay, you've got 3 minutes. Before I go through the answers, I'm going to give you the opportunity to look at the answers yourselves. Okay, and then you can start writing in what you think the answers are. Into the live chat over here. So 3 minutes, starting from now. Right. Okay, you've got 30 seconds left. 30 seconds left. Ten seconds left. Okay, right, let's look at the answers. So, like I said, see if you can get the answer in before I say it. So we know number one is knocked down. Number two, the whole area is really run down. It really needs to be and given some investment. So the answer here, any ideas? It begins with R. R. The answer is number two, and it is renovate. So simply put, renovate. When you renovate a place, you make it, well, new again. You do up a place. You make it, you repair things. You fix things that needed to be fixed. Yes, thank you, Elena. Well done. Renovate or renovated is the answer. Let's see. The whole area is run down. It really needs to be renovated. Yes, you are correct. It's supposed to have ed on the end. Renovated. Well done. So yes, number two needs to be renovated. Number three. Again, if you can get your answer in before I say it, go for it. It's quite a rough part of town. I'd of it after dark if you don't want to be stabbed. So, I'd base of it? No. I date back of it? Nope. Dominate of it? Now that still doesn't make sense, does it? Housed? No. Not well. We know it's not down, and we know it's not renovate. So it's either saw or steer clear. So it's quite a rough part of town. Okay, so Elena, you've gone for housed. Let's see. I'd housed of it after dark. Ah, you're thinking in terms of like stay in your house after dark. Okay, I can understand why you would go for that, but that is not the correct answer in this case. Number three is steer clear of. Okay, okay. Um, of is the preposition of this term, to steer clear of. Steer clear of. Just like you're in a car and you are driving and you steer away from a problem or from a car, we can also use it in terms of behavior. So steer clear of the area after dark. Okay, number four. Um, some of the buildings in the historic center, something over 600 years. Some of the buildings in the historic center, over 600 years. So we're looking for something that talks about age. Any ideas? I'll give you clues. It's either going to be base or date back. Base or date back. Okay, see if you can guess what the answer is. It's either base or date back. Base. Okay, again, I can see why you've gone for it, because you'd be thinking in terms of base as when it was created and stuff. But unfortunately, that is not the correct answer in this case. It's actually date back. So number four is date back. But nonetheless, thank you very much for participating and trying to guess the correct answer. That's a bit strange of the light. Um, okay, so the correct answer is date back. Now, date back is, we use this when we're talking about when something was created. So if you talk about, let's see, a famous, like France, okay, Paris, if we take Paris, okay. In the 1600s, Paris was renovated, basically. It was flattened and rebuilt. And Paris that we see today dates back to mid 1600s. So we use it, it dates back. We're using it to say when it was created. Again, if we talk about, let's say, the Colosseum, for example, we can say the Colosseum dates back to uh, 300 years before Christ, for example. I think it's something, I don't know. I don't know when the Colosseum was was built. Sorry, I'm giving it as an example. Um, so that is how we use it to say when something was roughly created. Okay, so we've done four. Number five, it's an up and coming area. Lots of businesses are relocating there, so property prices have. Now, we need to find a word that talks about something going up. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to write your answer in, and then I'll let you know what the correct answer is. So it's an up and coming area. Lots of buildings are relocating there, so property prices have. Well done. Saw is the correct answer, except we're going to have to put it. We're going to have to change the. It's a past participle, so we're going to have to put it in its past participle form, sword. But well done, Elena. You got the right word. But as this is a present perfect, have soared. So this is going to have to be in the past participle. Soared means to go up, but it's a soaring is like a plane soars up into the sky. It's when something goes up and up and up, continues to go up, and it goes up quickly. And that's the important thing about when, let's say, prices soar. If prices soar, it means the price is going up really quickly. Okay. Number six. We've got that grand building over there was previously a place, but now something, the National Gallery. Something, the National Gallery. So I'm going to give you a choice to help you out. It's either house or it's going to be base again. So it's either base or house. Base or house. We do need to think of the how we're going to finish the word as well. Does it need a plural s? Well, sorry, does it need an s? Can we leave it as it is? Do we need to add an ed? What do we think it is? So I'll give you 10 seconds and then I'll give you my answer. Okay, so the answer to number 6 is houses. So this is not talking about the house itself. It's not a noun in this case. It's going to be a in the verb form. Housed. Okay, let's just see the context. If it's the past, then housed could be correct. If it's the past participle, it could be correct. But if it's not that, and it's something to do with the present, we're going to have to do something slightly different. So the grand building over there was previously a palace. So far it's in the past, but now, now is now the present. Now houses the National Gallery. So in this case, it's going to have to be houses the National Gallery. We can't go with housed because we've got the word now, so we know we're talking about the present. House, to house something, but houses, it's a strange word because up until now you will have seen this word house as a noun, but we can use it as a verb, and it simply means in terms of where you house, where you hold something, in terms which is related to accommodation. So for instance, if we're talking about an art gallery, for example, that's when we can use but now houses the National Gallery. It means it now has become a gallery, basically, or where things are kept, actually. That's the best way to think of it. When we use this word house to house something, we're talking about where things are now kept or were kept. So if you're thinking of let's say the artwork, the painting of the Mona Lisa, originally in the past, the Mona Lisa was housed in a place in Italy, but the Louvre now houses these types of art collections, such as the Mona Lisa. So that is how we can use it. It's where something is kept. And I think that's the best way to remember or to think about it. Feel free to try and write your own examples of house. If you want me to give you more examples, I can do as well. Next one, we've now on to number 7. It's the most affluent part of town. All the embassies are something there. Now, we've only got 2 options left here. We've either got dominate or base. Dominate or base. So we'll do both of them at the same time. Number 8, it says they built this huge skyscraper a few years ago. It really something that excellent. Well done, Elena. Yes. So number 9 is based. All the embassies are based there, and well done. Spotted the passive as well in that. Number 10, therefore, is obviously it really dominates the city. So excellent. Well done. If something dominates a city, it means it's easy to see. It sticks out. I mean, again, if you go to somewhere like Paris, the Eiffel Tower dominates the city. It's it's the famous landmark. If you go to Rome, you've got a few places that can dominate the city, but the Colosseum again is a prime example. Excellent, well done, guys. So we've now increased our vocabulary a little bit. We're now going to move on to something which can be a little bit difficult to explain. I am guessing that by this point you guys have already had you already have a slight idea of how this works. We're just going to look at something called relative clauses. Relative clauses can be quite difficult to get right, but they're so important when it comes to writing. So let's have a little look. Sorry, I've got a problem with my light. So relative clauses. We use relative clauses to add information about nouns or previous clauses. Now, just to give you a slight understanding what we mean by a clause, okay? A clause is a part of a sentence. So you've got your first clause, okay? In this case, if we look at an example, A, we've got over to the right is the arena, comma. That is the first part of the clause. So that would be in the context of this. This is the previous clause. So the relative clause, which is now the second clause, sorry, just writing this in. So the second clause is the relative clause when there's going to be a full stop at the end. And in this case, it comes after the comma. So there's a comma, then we put in the relative clause, which comes afterwards. And this is where you have a sentence such as, which is where all the big concerts and sports events are held. Okay. The important thing to know is that when we use a relative clause, okay, which is, again, it's the second part of the sentence, it comes after the comma, we are adding extra, first of all, we're adding extra information. And we're then going to end the sentence. We're not going to continue the sentence. It is extra information. You will see a pattern. And the pattern is that if you remove the first clause and you just read the second clause, the relative clause, you cannot really make a sentence out of it because you don't have the full context. So for instance, if I were to say, which is where all the big concerts and sports events are held, that's not a complete sentence. I don't know what I'm talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about. It's not a complete sentence on its own. And this is a really important thing. When we use relative clauses, we are adding a bit of language that on its own, it's not going to be a complete sentence. We're adding extra information and then we're ending the sentence with a full stop. So to make it, we've got the first clause, which tells us what we're talking about. And then the second clause is when we add extra information, and then we're ending the sentence. So B, for example, it contains the tomb of Stefan Dusan, first clause, who was perhaps the greatest Serbian emperor ever. That's the second clause. The second clause is the relative clause. You, again, look at C. You might have seen it on TV, first clause. It's the place they held the Eurovision Song Contest. Second clause, relative clause. Ricardo has joined us. Hello, Ricardo. Thank you for joining. Then we have D as an example. There's the Victor Monument up there as well, comma. Now the relative clause, which was erected after the First World War. Okay, so this is simply how we use it. Just to go over it again. First clause, you're stating what you're talking about. The second clause after the comma is your relative clause, and you're adding extra information that you think is important, and then you end your sentence. Okay. So number one, if we were to look at it, if we're linking, this is still question 7. If we're linking 1 to 5 to A to D, so we're linking sentences 1 to 5 to examples A to D in question 7. We've got 1. So the first question is, which sentences have a comma? You will see that if you look closely, you will find that the sentences that have the comma are sentences A, B, and D. Only C does not have a comma. Number 2, if you removed the underlined relative clauses, which sentences would you still make? So, if you removed the underline relative clauses, which sentences would you still make? Okay, so here what it's talking about is if you removed the sentences that are underlined, is the first clause, does that still make sense? Can we still make a sentence out of it? Let's have a look. Okay, A, over to the right is the arena. Yes, we could put a full stop there. We don't need to add the relative clause. So that is 1. B, it contains the tomb of Stefan Dusan. Full stop. Yeah, that can be a sentence on its own. You might, no, number C, you might have seen it on TV. No, we'd have to change 1 or 2 things. D, there's the Victor Monument up there as well. Yes, we can end the sentence there. So that answers question 2. So question 2, we can make A, B, D. The first clause could be a sentence on its own, no probs. Number 3, the question, do we need a comma before adding A, an essential, or B, non-essential information? What we're talking about here is, does it make sense? So therefore, the answer here is, if we look at A, over to the right is the arena, Because you can end the sentence and it actually makes perfectly good sense, adding which is where all the big concerts and sports events are held is not necessary. It's not essential information. It is extra information. And that's the important thing to remember about making the relative clause. The relative part of your clause is non-essential information in terms of its grammar, because the first part still makes perfectly good sense. It is non-essential information from a grammatical point of view. You personally might think it's important information to add, but that's a matter of opinion. But when we come to the rules of grammar, it's non-essential information, because the first part of the sentence makes a perfectly good sentence on its own. Okay, number 4. The question is, apart from which and who, do you know any other relative pronouns? And this is quite important. You are using relative pronouns here. Well, you've got a few possible answers. Your answers might include the likes of that, whose, whom, when, where, why. So generally speaking, think of all the WH questions that you can think of, as well as that as well. And number 5, do you always need a relative pronoun to add information after the noun? Do you always need a relative pronoun to add information after the noun? Simply put, no. The reason being, and I'll just read out what it says over here, when we're not using commas before the relative clauses, in other words, when we're using defining relative clauses, the relative pronoun can be left out if the pronoun is the object of the relative clause. Now, what it means is, simply put, changing the sentence structures around. So if the start of your sentence actually begins with something like where, then you don't necessarily need to have in your relative clause, you don't necessarily need to put where again, because you'll be repeating where twice. So, for example, if I put this is where, okay, this is where, let's see, can I think of someone famous? All right, for example, we're walking around Rome. We can see an area where we think a Caesar was buried. So we could say, for instance, this is where Emperor Caligula is thought to have been buried, comma. Now we don't need to repeat where, obviously. So this is where we think Emperor Caligula, this is where we think Emperor Caligula was buried. And he was famous, obviously, for being quite a bad guy, or who was famous for being a pretty bad guy. So what we're talking about here is it's not absolutely essential that you start your relative clause with a relative pronoun. It doesn't need to be done. Having said that, context makes a very big difference. And more importantly, and this is would be my rule, it's instead of thinking of it like I don't need to, make sure you're not repeating the same pronoun. Let's start off with that. So if you're making a relative clause, make sure you are not repeating your pronoun. I think that's the better way to look at it. Just don't repeat the same pronoun. You don't need it. You've put it in at the beginning. It's a bit like if I were to constantly, if I'm talking about someone, let's say John, and every single time I'm talking about John, I'm using John. I don't need to use John all the time. After I've introduced John, I can refer to John as either he, for instance, or I can refer to him as he, for example. So we have to think in terms of repetitiveness, and I think that's what really number 5 is getting at. So with that being said, let's have just a little, how we're doing for time? 43, okay. Let's look at number 8. Let's look at number 8. What we'll do is we'll go through it together. So, in number 8, you're going to have to try and rewrite each of the pairs of sentences below as one sentence using a relative clause. So, for example, here we've got that statue is of our first president, Václav Havel. He was also a famous writer. So if you wanted to link the two together here, you would have to try and think of maybe using something like who, for example. So you could say that statue is of our first president, Václav Havel, who was also a famous writer. So to link the two together after the name, so this is for number 1, okay, after Václav Havel, after the comma, you'd simply put who was also a famous writer. And that is how you complete the sentence. That is all you need to do. So the statue, and that is an example already in there as well. So we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to go through it with you as we do it. So number 2, we're coming. I've got a very strange light. So number 2, we're coming up to Dejinji. I don't know how to say that. Sorry. We're coming up to Dedinji. Dedinji is one of the more affluent parts of the city. So we now need to think of the comma. Where we're going to put the comma. We've got Dedinji twice. We do not need to use Dedinji twice. So the answer, we're coming up to Dedinji, comma. Now we need something. Something is one of the more affluent parts. Which, excellent. Well done, Nadia. Excellent. That is exactly the correct answer. So we're coming up to the dingy, comma, which is one of the more affluent parts. Now you might be thinking, why which and not where? Because I can see here, Eleanor, you've written where. Nadia, you've written which. Here is the answer has to be which. Now, we're coming up to Danjia, where is one of the more affluent parts of the city? No, because it's not where is one of the more? No, this is actually a comparative. Now, this is in the sentence here, in the relative clause, there is a comparative. And when we're the comparative, we are comparing one place to another place. When we are choosing to do a comparative such as this is which one. At a basic level, you have to think in your mind, this is like which one, which is. And because it's not a question, but a qualifying the statement, this is going to be which is one of the more affluent parts of the city. Now, if I wanted to change it and I wanted to use where, I have to really change my relative clause. I have to change around the language. How could I do it? We're coming up to the where. Okay, I would have to go with a noun. So I would have to go with where plus a noun, like where people have started to invest, it's making it an affluent place. I would have to really change things around a little bit. It's my word collocation. So I can go with which is. But going with where is in this case, where I'm trying to add extra information, it's not going to work. Especially as I'm using a comparative such as more affluent as well. So there's lots of things to consider, but I really appreciate both of your answers. But number 2, it's which. Number 3, let's have a look. Just behind us, over to the right, is Santa Catalina Cathedral. Full stop. I was actually married in there. So we've got a few things here. We've got just behind us, over to the right, is Santa Catalina Cathedral. Now, again, would we say which is or where I was? Which is where I was. Santa Catalina Cathedral, comma, which is where I was actually married, where I was actually married. Well done, guys. The actual answer is both. In this case, if I play around with my language carefully, I can use both, but I have to make sure my word collocation is correct. If I'm going to use which, I would have to use which is actually, no, that's extra, but nonetheless, which is actually um, which is actually where I was married. As we can see here, to complete the sentence, um, I am going to start off with which and followed by which I'm going to use is. So which is actually where I was married. So over to the right is Santa Catalina Cathedral, comma, which is where I was actually married. So that's one possibility. Now, could I change this to where? Well, let's have a little look. Santa Catalina Cathedral, comma, where I was married. Yes, where I was married. But no, look at the difference here, where I was married. What we are doing is slightly different. Instead of going with which is, I'm jumping straight to where I was. Again, I cannot go with where is. I'm going where I, the pronoun, where I was married. So that works, where I was married. I can put something extra in, which is actually where I was married. If you're going to use which is actually where I was married, that's a real emphasis. That's almost as if people might be surprised by the answer, but both of them are correct. Number 4. And the building over there is the Court of Justice, full stop. I got divorced there. Now, do you think the answer is roughly the same? Can we go with both where or which, depending on if we follow with a pronoun or following with which is? Do you think we can use both, just like the previous sentence? If you think both, write both. Where I got, yep, you could use that. Where I got divorced, that makes sense. Do you think you can use which? Which is? Which is where I got divorced? Yes, the answer is both. I can use both, but again, I like you to see the pattern. If I'm going to go with which, I have to go with which is. If it's where, I can then go with where I was. So which is technically extra here, which is actual where I got, which is actually where I got divorced. Yes, no, if you, there's an extra typo, there's an extra A there, Nadia, but yes, you could say which is actually where I got divorced. Yes, that's absolutely fine. That makes sense too. Number 5, everyone, number 5. This shop on the left is run by my friend Zora. Her son plays professional football in Turkey now. This is definitely extra information. Now, the question is, this shop on the left is run by my friend Zora. Now, this person's talking about Zora's son. We have to think carefully of our relative pronoun here. Who or whose? Excellent. Well done, Elena. That's the correct answer. In this case, it's going to have to be whose. Whose son plays. Well done. Well done, Nadia. Yes, you got the answer correct as well. Number 6, I started working in that office over there in 2003. Even then, the area was already starting to boom. Ah! Oh my gosh, this light is really bad. I have to be really careful. It's very sensitive. So, number 6. So I started working in that office over there in 2003. Something. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky one, potentially. I'm actually just going to give you the answer when I come to think of it. I think it'll be better. Now, if you have, let's consider what we mean by even. Ooh. No, not quite, but good guess. Let me explain. Now, if you have even then is referring to a period of time in the past. Now, if we could write even then at the start of the sentence, but actually we want to link two sentences together, making it a when. Ooh. Ooh, close. There is a possibility, I think, if we change the rest of the sentence, but not quite. The correct answer is, and there's a few possibilities. The first option is at which time the area was. Okay, so that's your first option. So even then, in a relative clause, if you want to put two things together, talking about a period of time in the past, use at which time the area was blah blah blah. Now, your other alternative is during which time the area was. You've got two options there. Trying to talk about the state of a place during that period of time in the past. So in a sentence, it will look like this. I started working in that office over there in 2003, at which time the area was already starting to boom. Now, if I were to create my own sentence, okay, just to give you another example of how to use at which time, I could say, the 80s saw a technological boom, at which time computers and mobile phones were just coming onto the market. The 80s saw a technological boom, comma, at which time computers and mobile phones were just coming onto the market. So again, I could write the 80s saw a technological boom, full stop. Even then, computers and mobile phones were just coming onto the market. All right. Feel free to try and write your own example for this one. And I'll be more than happy. Write it in the comments section, write it on Facebook, wherever. I'd be more than happy to look at your own examples to see if you can look at it. Finally, number 7. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Number 7, they produced tiles in the factory. Full stop. They export most of them to Northern Europe. Now, the answer, they produce tiles in the factory something. Now, let's have a little look. You've got this term, most of which. Now, if the way, again, you can look at this, if you're linking two sentences together and you've got one sentence and ending with factory, for example, and the next sentence starts with they export most. Now, if this is how you're going to start a sentence, you've got most. So if you want to continue the sentence with most, this is your opportunity to use most of which. So instead of having two sentences, blah, 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 factory, full stop, they export most of them to North Europe, you can link the two sentences together. You know you want to talk about something of the most. There's that word in there. Therefore, the phrase that you can use to link the two clauses together is most of which. So they produce tiles in that factory, comma, most of which are exported. That's important. Are exported to Northern Europe. Okay, so that is how you can link two ideas together in this sense. Now, unfortunately, that brings us to the end of today's lesson. And I want to thank all of you for participating, for coming to the lesson, for joining the lesson. I hope this has been of some help. If you have any questions, please ask in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, share the video as well with anyone that you think would find this helpful. We didn't complete everything that I wanted to look at in today's lesson, so we will continue that when we next have our lesson. If I recall correctly, that's on Friday, I think. Friday afternoon. So thank you very much. Take care. Hope you're all well. And I will see all of you next time. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.